Chapter 8. Out of the Wild. As the victorious war stores silently disappeared over the horizon, inside Treetop there was a short silence that seemed to last a long time, as people tried to digest what they had just witnessed. Cool! And then they descended into yelling about all the cool things they had just seen. I want to go to a war store! Holy crap, look! Elle said and pointed away from the destruction at a different part of the city, a smoking part of the city. There were a few flames scattered throughout. That's right near our apartments! Tony, Elle, and Perry all lived within a few blocks of each other. It was about a mile away, and it looked like one of those giant pieces of debris must have flown all the way over there, or one of the missiles hit their apartment. Perry appeared behind them with a stone smile on his face. That was fucking crazy, huh, man? Perry said. Garfield, Elle said and looked at Tony, her face saying, let's go now. They all took off towards the elevator. Walking home was surreal, as they were all worried about their places. Well, except Perry. He didn't give a fuck about his place. He shared a shithole with a bunch of druggies, and he wanted out anyway. But his suitcase of drugs was there, and that's what Perry cared about most of all. Elle had a cat, and Tony had a dog. So they were all in a hurry, half walking, half jogging to check on those things. There were billows of smoke coming from many different parts of the city. They walked past many of them, people crying outside. There were sirens blaring in the distance in all directions. Valley Forest wasn't that big. You could almost hear a siren halfway across the city. When they first got to Main Street, there were a few war store customers celebrating their loot. A block later, they passed a bloody ad who was injured in the sale. His right arm bent in a wrong way. Must have been broken. He still tried to shuffle in their path, like a zombie trying to sell something. A couple of cops sped by. Then they passed a body part that could have been a butt cheek. As they turned onto their street, the destruction unfolded in front of them. Their street got hit pretty bad, with massive debris. Perry took off towards his house, yelling, I'll call you! There was damage to almost every building. Fires, water lines spraying randomly, light poles leaning into buildings, bus stop benches flipped over in the middle of the street. Some entire apartments were gone or walls completely ripped off. Elle tried not to take off running. Tony grabbed her arm. I'll meet you at your place, she said, and they both took off towards their apartments. As Tony came up to his apartment, his landlady came running up and started screaming in Farsi. He had no idea what she was saying, but he understood. Tony looked over his shoulder and saw his dog sitting in front of his apartment. Fozzie! Fozzie looked up, a little confused, then saw him and came running with a look of relief in her eyes. She was fine, a little dusty but not hurt. Tony's apartment was on the first floor. He started walking towards it. There was about a 3-foot hole in the wall between the door and the window, with a bit of smoke floating out through the new hole. Something had smashed through. That's how Fozzie must have got out. Tony approached and looked through the hole at the smoking black hole of debris in the middle of his living room. It wasn't perfectly spherical, but it was kind of ball-shaped. It was burnt to a crisp, with a flaky covering like a black, burnt croissant. It didn't look like metal or anything explosive, but he had no idea what it could have been. Fozzie cautiously smelled in its direction. Tony unlocked, opened the front door, and walked in. Fozzie jumped through the new hole, rushing past the smoking black ball and circling around it until she was back at Tony's feet. He looked around. The rest of the apartment was fine. Foz, let's go. And they took off for Elle's place. Tony's tiny Persian landlord was still in the same spot, still yelling what sounded like the same thing. He saw people packing. Some cars were filled with suitcases. Others were busy boarding up holes in their place. Some people trying to create makeshift walls. People were crying, yelling, sobbing, staring off into the distance blankly. Some neighbors were yelling, fighting at each other, and there were a few bodies in the street covered with blankets. It looked and felt like a terrorist attack aftermath video you see on the news. As they approached Elle's house, Fozzie and Tony bounced up the stairs and heard her crying. The door was open, and they quickly went in. Elle was crouched in the corner, leaning over something. As Tony got closer, he noticed she had Garfield in her arms. His two hind legs were crushed and twisted into a bloody mess. Tony grabbed and hugged Elle, and she cried even harder. Gar let out a haunting sound. He was always a strong cat. The poor guy was a trooper. He even tried to stand up when Tony looked at him, but it was a fruitless effort. Her apartment was a wreck. The entire wall between her place and the neighbors was smashed and crumbled. She could see into her neighbor's apartment. The neighbors were sitting on the couch, watching the news. The fridge had fallen over, and there was a small puddle of blood underneath it. That must have been where Garfield was. Fozzie went up and sniffed Garfield. He sniffed her back. All previous rivalries gone. Oh my God, what do we do? Elle pleaded. The vet went through Tony's head. He doubted that. Perry came busting through the door. Shit! Is Garfield okay? Perry and Garfield had a very strong connection. Elle was crying. No! Look at his legs! Perry saw his legs. Oh, fuck! He tried to stop it from coming out of his mouth, but he said it. Foz made it. How's your place? Perry asked. Oh, not as bad as this. I just got one big hole, Tony said. Garfield gurgled. Fuck! Fuck! Elle let out. He's still alive! What do I do? Perry looked over at Tony and whispered, put him out of his misery. And then he made a gesture of smashing his head with a rock. He had a knack for being unemotional and getting right to the root of the problem, even if it was rude sounding. Elle looked up and saw him. What? Smash his head? Fuck you, Perry! He's in misery. It would save him some pain and agony. Elle kept crying and looked at her mangled best friend. After a few long moments, she said, Guys, get out! Then after a short pause with more authority, Get out! Leave me alone! Perry made a break for the door. That was an easy escape. Tony went up to Elle. Are you okay? What's up? Just leave, Tony. We can't fix him, right? He's basically dead. Leave me alone with my cat. I'll meet you guys at your house later. Are you sure, Elle? We can try a vet, Tony said, even though he knew it was a fruitless gesture. She looked at him. Her face said, You think I'm stupid? Okay. We'll meet at my place. Call or yell if you need anything. I love you, Elle. That might have been the first time Tony said that. Elle replied, I love you too. He gave her a kiss, and they took off. Fozzie turned and brought up the caboose. When Tony got home, Perry was already there, on his couch, hitting his 4-foot bong. Perry looked down at the still smoking ball in the living room. What the fuck is that thing? He sputtered, trying to hold in a hit. Tony joked, It's my new beanbag. You should check it out. Perry laughed, stopped, thought about it, then ran over and tried to jump into the debris like a beanbag. He hit it and they both rolled. Perry's legs went out from underneath him and he ate it on his ass pretty hard. Tony laughed at him and Fozzie laughed at him too. Perry was holding his butt in pain. Oh man! Tony looked over at the debris and noticed some color under the black, crusty, burnt shell. He walked over and the crust and the words rainbow became visible. It was a package of some sort and it was very colorful. Now they had to know. Tony pushed on the burned crust to move it away, and right after the word rainbow, the word dildo. Rainbow dildos? Perry came running like it was Christmas, and like a little kid on Christmas, began ripping open the wrapping. It was a big box of rainbow dildos. He grabbed one and held it up in the air, shaking it. They were actually colored like a rainbow. He grabbed another one. Rainbow dildos for everyone! Thanks, War Store! Then he picked up a half-burnt one. And became sad for it. Oh, poor burnt dildo. Fozzie, you want this one? He threw it in her direction, and it landed in front of her face. She noticed it, almost became interested, almost a bit, but then turned away and let her head down. She knew Perry. Oh my God! Did you see that? She almost bit it! Perry roared with laughter. You're pretty happy for someone whose city just got destroyed by a war store, Tony said. My apartment's fine. There's a big-ass hole in the wall, but those fucks are so high they barely noticed it. That war store shit is crazy. Yeah, and thousands of people died. Honestly, though, I'm pretty sure the world is better off without those people. Who are those people? Tony asked. Man, anyone who lines up to go to shopping at a war store? Anyone who sees their best friend get splattered by a war store and still wants to go in? Those people are worthless idiots. There's too many people on the planet anyways. Well, I probably agree with most of what you're saying, Tony replied. Perry continued, we need a good war or disease that we can't conquer, you know? We're too powerful and there's too many of us. If Earth was a video game, it'd need a patch, because humans are OP. People would be trolling that dev hard, Perry said. I kind of want to try an IC, though. Tony replied, yeah, I do too, but you can't untry it. That's what I hear. And it seems people who have ICs are like the masses. Maybe it turns you into that. The type of people who think a war store is a fun place to shop even though it'll kill you. People who want to buy these things, Perry said, shaking the rainbow dildo. Well, a lot of people might want to buy these things, but you know what I mean. This whole city is filled with those people. Shit. The whole country is. Fuck. The whole world is, Perry. Wait, fuck the world, Perry replied. Well, where is there to go then? Antarctica? Netherlands? Perry's eyes perked up at the mention of the Netherlands. It used to be on his bucket list until they neutered it and it was no longer the land of the red light district, drugs, and hookers. His eyes blew off the idea of the Netherlands and he nonchalantly said, off the grid? Tony laughed. Like run off into the forest and eat berries and worms? Perry's eyes perked up again. Yeah. Fucking let's do this. What? Let's get a few packs worth of shit and go build a utopia in the forest. Perry was kind of kidding, like he always was. There's hundreds of miles of forest north of here. Perry and Tony liked to go camping and did many times. When a lot of their friends would go to like Cancun or Lake Havasu for spring break, Tony and Perry would take a bunch of mushrooms and go camping in the Kern River for a few days. A few times they would only take fishing poles, no food, and live off fish only. They actually had been off the grid for about a week at a time. Guess it was possible. Perry went on. Seriously, what are we going to do here? Looking out the window. Wait for the next war store battle to fully destroy our places? Or maybe to die watching a bunch of idiots go shopping? Tony still was laughing at him. What, you going to go live without weed? Perry replied like he'd thought about it many hours. I'll bring some, and I'll grow some. And what about Taco Bell? I know you need your Taco Bell, Perry. Fuck Taco Bell! Perry started to rant. I can fish that river till the day I die. Me, you, Fozzie, we can catch rodents and birds and shit. Fozzie looked up at him, too tired to care. We'll take Elle and Missy and we'll start a whole new society of cool people. Yeah, I'm sure they love that idea. What idea would I love? Elle said, as she stuck her head through the new hole in Tony's apartment and began to limbo her way in. Perry took the bait and ran with it. Dildos! We're gonna make millions selling rainbow dildos. Elle laughed. She wasn't happy, but the sight of hundreds of rainbow dildos did make her smile a little bit. She walked over, jumped on the couch, and curled up next to Tony. He's gone. Garfield? Yep. Perry was interested. What happened? Elle looked at Perry. I took care of it. Perry and Tony looked at each other, not sure what to say or think. They didn't say anything. Perry scooted the issue. I say we blow this popsicle stand of a city and go hang out in the woods for a few years. Tony looked at Elle, thinking she'd shoot down this wild thought quickly. That sounds good to me. Fuck these IC-infested, ad-idiot, war store-loving morons who'd kill and or die to buy the newest smartwatch. Elle stood up and kicked the package of rainbow dildos, shaking a few loose. This is what we get, a bunch of rainbow dildos, fucked up apartments, and dead cats? She was actually on board. Tony was surprised and tried to be the voice of reason, actually. Wait. You guys are talking about leaving society? Toilets, the internet, candy, drugs, concerts, video games, pinball? And he looked at Perry. Porn! Perry pulled out his phone. Solar-powered phone charger. I got the internet, porn, and games covered. Elle chimed in. You probably wipe your ass with that phone, too. So you got toilet paper covered, too? She reached out in a give-me-the-bong motion. Perry obliged. Just before she took a hit, she nodded towards Perry. I like his idea for once. And she took a bigger rip than Tony had ever seen her take. She had a different look in her eye, now that Garfield was gone. Elle looked at Perry. Have you asked Missy about it? Perry replied, No, Tony just had this brilliant idea. Elle looked at Tony surprised. This is your idea? Tony rolled his eyes and shook his head. Nope, jizz. And he pelted Perry with a rainbow dildo. I'll text her and tell her we're doing it right now, Elle said, and started tapping on her phone. They were both high, but they've both been high before, Tony thought. How was Tony the only one that didn't want to, quote, leave society? A few seconds later, Elle said, Missy's in. What? Tony said. Perry was laying on his back, holding a rainbow dildo above his mouth, shaking it, slowly moving it towards his mouth. Nice, he said, right before the dildo penetrated his mouth. Fozzie, let's go, Perry said enthusiastically. He knew that tone of voice would get her excited. Fozzie jumped up and ran over to her leash, wagging her tail. See, Tony, she wants to go too. Tony again being the voice of reason. We can't just run off. Perry said, Okay, we'll make a list of things we need. I'll take you guys to the old shitty Walmart. If Juicy has any of those fake credit cards, we'll use those. Or we'll just rob the shit out of that place. We're not bringing Juicy, and Eric and Juicy are attached to the hip. I know, but they would love to help in any sort of criminal endeavor. We'll do it tonight, then tomorrow we'll leave and we'll form utopia in the forest. That sounds like a fucking rad plan, Perry. Do it, Elle said surprisingly. We'll need... And Elle started to list off the things they needed. Perry started typing a list into his phone as Elle listed it off. The both of them were so into it, but they forgot a few things. So Tony got into it and reminded them, and all of a sudden he was part of this. He wasn't sure if this was just one of Perry's harebrained schemes that he would forget about tomorrow, or if they were serious.